Buenas noches, mi gente. This is your host, Ray Collazo, and this is the special post-Democratic presidential debate, post-debate discussion on the Found in Translation talk show. And you're watching this and you're listening to this on various platforms, and we really appreciate our live audience tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Found in Translation is the talk show that stacks truth, la verdad, about politics and today's hottest issues. And we got a lot of truth. We got to sift through a lot of things to get to the truth tonight. No question about it. Thank you again so much for joining us on Ray's Talk, Found in Translation talk show. Again, of course, your host, Ray Collazo. And on this very special post-debate edition, some of our favorite programming here, the man who's really been the brainchild of having these live shows so we can share with our Found in Translation community our very initial gut reactions to these debates and sort of the discussions around the future of our country. My compadre, the executive producer of this special series, and a great political and communications mind and strategist in his own right, and someone who's got a very big announcement he's going to share in a few minutes with us, Elbert Garcia. Welcome to Found in Translation, brother.
Thanks, Ray. It's great to be here. It's the night before I'm launching my own podcast. I'm going to be starting a Dominican podcast called Que Lo Que.
Que Lo Que. Oh no! Don't just skirt over that headline.
Mira. Look. It's not about me. We got a fantastic pundit over here, Alicia Lewis. Later on talking to us. So I don't want to take too much steam from her. But we're really excited down in Miami, getting the launch for this Dominican podcast. And so we're doing that tomorrow. But the night before that, I couldn't think of a better person and a better topic than to be on tonight to discuss, this debate, an important debate that we had. Had a lot of things. There were a lot of things that was also missing. So real excited to be here with you, Ray, to be here on the broadcast today,
No, this is very exciting. We're going to hear more. We're very excited about the Que Lo Que podcast. We're going to hear more about it later in the show. And I know especially our Dominican fans, part of the Dominican community is really a big part of the family here in Found Translation, including not only Elbert Garcia, one of my pioneering producers and supporters of this project, but one of my regular co-hosts, Dioneli Reyes, who's going to be hosting the show we're going to do live from Rowan University Thursday night. So amongst a multitude of Dominicans that love this kind of content. So I know they're going to be very intrigued about your show, Elbert. But you're absolutely right, Elbert. When we talked a few nights ago about trying to bring in, we were trying to, sketch out in our minds who would be the perfect person to join our trio this evening to discuss the Democratic debate tonight. So, well, we definitely got to get a Latina in the mix. Got to get a West Coast person. First of all, they'll be awake still, but also got to keep that Cali flavor in the mix. We got to get someone that no te de pelo la lengua, bro. Going to keep it real, keep it funky, and going to be straight with our community. And we couldn't think of a better person, but a great friend to the show, social justice advocate and co-founder of We Said Enough, and a great friend, Alicia Lewis. Alicia.
Hey there, guys. Thank you so much for having me. You're right. California still awake, sort of. 3-hour debate. So, it teetered off there for a bit. But, I'm proud to represent West Coast, Best Coast. So, sorry, guys. I'm going to hold it down early.
Let me tell you something. When you talk about, and Alicia, let's be specific about it. You're chiming in today from the beautiful city. And, of course, the capital of our greatest state, Sacramento. Like I said, You're representing the Sac. Cornel West, Larry Boa, your former mayor, KJ, Kevin Johnson, a multitude of celebrities.
LeVar Burton. Right?
That's right. So got a lot of love for Sacramento. And Alicia is a former colleague of mine, and we've still stayed colleagues in the social justice movement. She's going to bring a great perspective to the show again. Thank you so much. If you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, we really appreciate you joining the show. Please share this conversation with your friends. We want to have the interaction. You can comment on the chat of the platform that you're watching this on, as well as Elbert. There would even be why don't you put a link on Facebook if they actually want to jump into this video conversation?
Definitely.
There's also a possibility of that as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So just check out that link if you want to just jump on camera and be part of this conversation. So we just ended a marathon debate session, 3 hours plus. I don't even know if it was ended by the time we jumped on.
Pete was still talking when I turned it off. So
yeah,
we had
to do the show at some point for the audience. So, but I want to state my sort of big picture item, and then I want to get Alicia and Elbert's initial thoughts. So, with 12 people on stage, there's only so much, right? So, obviously, an ongoing challenge for the B and C tier candidates to sort of get some shine, even though I think a few people had some moments today. But the big story was the ire of the wannabes turned to who is now being perceived, and I guess the reality of the situation by their tone and their approach to the new frontrunner, Senator Elizabeth Warren. So the fact that this was in some ways a bit of a referendum, or the first time where other candidates were trying to poke holes in her candidacy, in her policies, and her positions, I thought was really kind of the big story. I'll talk about my perspective on it. Doesn't seem like anything earth-shattering happened through those attacks. And so I think the question remains, the bigger issue to me, Alicia, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is not so much the attacks on Warren, which obviously is significant for her candidacy, but really, to me, from not only from the questions, from the mode, the approach of the attacks to Senator Warren, was really an attack on, and I think on some level, the people questioning were part of this, on the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Because if you look at the front runners, it's pretty obvious. If you add up Sanders and Warren and Biden, who's the clear front runner on the mainstream, the progressives have made some headway, and I think that's scaring a lot of people, including a lot of the people that were on the dais today.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, seeing this big, the pack turned, right? After having seen them continuously go after Biden and then watch this complete swing and really validating that Warren's front and center and, almost all hands on deck by mods to go after her position. I mean, one, obviously she's holding the crown right now on, on who's leading, but I really think that her and Bernie both are really having to not just put their positions on defense, but I mean, they definitely held a line and almost like bounced off each other. And I think to demonstrate that kind of wall on the progressive side, just showing the complete shift we've seen in the Democratic Party as a whole. And folks I think they're hitting a point of desperation of trying to, kind of scratch at that and see what they're able to somewhat unearth, or see if they can somehow get one of them to backpedal a little. But I think the fact that they're both holding the same position predominantly, the very little variation on how they're going through it is making it tough for folks.
Alicia, how do you think the attacks went? What do you think as a group or any of them individually were successful at rattling Warren or having people question kind of the reality or how realistic potentially her plans are and how concrete some of her plans are, particularly around healthcare?
I think when it came to, the yes or no demand, right, about really getting to, are you going to raise taxes? She's really in a tough spot because at the end of the day, when you want to say yes, it's going to, but you don't want to have people lose sight of where the other costs are going to be coming down from. And I get why she's holding strong to that, so that she's constantly painting that big picture. But when it was so direct, and then you have, Pete coming in and also saying like, well, you also didn't answer it, that makes voters, I think, uneasy about like, well, why don't you just say yes, but, and then add in your other points of like how you're going to reduce costs overall. And I get that she's not wanting to, continuously say, she's not trying to give Republican talking points, and Klobuchar coming and saying, yes, you are, you're still giving them talking points by not answering it. I think she's in a no-win situation with what her answer is going to be, because the question's all wrong. It's not yes or no, you're raising taxes. It's, what's the plan going to be and what's the broad impact that's going to have on working families. And that's how the question should be framed. But no one wants to hear that. Yes or no, taxes, coming down the pipeline. Well, yeah, but probably not on you.
I would say, though, that, and I think, and look, I mean, one of the things that I saw, and I'd like to get Elbert and your perspective on, Alicia, is that it seemed like, and we've talked about this on the show consistently, is that the media plays such a powerful role in shaping these narratives, from how they position Mayor Pete standing next to her on the dais and the lineup, because they could have flipped it easily, right? And then, and also the fact that they very much sort of positioned her against him in the tone and the conversation, sort of setting him up to attack her. And so I find it interesting that I must say, though, that being said, the fact that she did it in the course of trying to explain the bigger picture, she did seem a little evasive on the answer. And now this has come up in multiple debates where she really hasn't laid out in concrete terms. And I have to give Biden credit for sort of pointing that out as well, unlike even Bernie and others around those policies. So do you think any of it's going to stick? And do you think Warren has to change her tact around answering those questions? Because at this point, this is her soft spot.
Right. And the questions are going to keep happening. Yes or no. What's going to happen? What are you planning to do? And, like I said, I understand why initially she wanted to have this framing answer instead, but that's just not going to work long term. At some point, you have to give the yes or no, because the question's not going to change. And unless we're somehow going to change the media dynamics in the course of the next year, which, as we know, that just doesn't happen. It's very cut on how they want to, drive the narrative themselves. You're going to have to play along a little bit and give the answer and work from there on what the fallout is or how people respond. I think at this point, the messaging is pretty clear what our broad goals are. So come back and explain that, say, yes, it's going to raise taxes, but for you, this is what will be different. And really spend the timing, not like our campaign doesn't have the messaging resources to be able to get out there and start talking about, working family impacts if she wants to, pull back from having to give a yes or no answer.
Yeah, I want to bring Elbert Garcia into this conversation. Elbert, you're someone that's worked for members of Congress, governors, not only on the political campaign side, but also sort of in advisoring, both in mainstream and Spanish language media. You tell me, man, how do you think any of those attacks? Well, first of all, what was your reaction to the fact that how it was obvious throughout the entire thing that the ire of the group, with the exception of Bernie and Bernie, basically went towards Warren, and very little to Biden at the end of the day, except for the top tier. And do you think it was effective?
Yeah, I think going into this, I think if you're reading the papers, if you're looking at the social media, she's surging, and I think this was people's best shot at trying to kind of dethrone her, right? Or to try to kind of knock her off her game. And so I think heading into it, I think we all pretty, it was very obvious that they were going to start to throw punches. You see someone like Buttigieg who, up until recently really hasn't been aggressive at all, right? And so, and really kind of seeing him not just, attacking her, but just in general being more aggressive and trying to kind of show that fight. They are following her lead, right? Because I think part of her surge is that people understand not only is she intelligent, not only does she have, not only does she have a plan, right? But she also has the energy, right? She's bringing that energy to it. And I think all the other candidates are having to lift up their energy there. Is it going to work? Is it not? I took at it as that, it's like, it's like when you're in, those classic, sports games, or especially in a basketball game, right? Like, halftime comes in, that they're going to, the other team is going to do a run, right? And so I think part of her team was to try to see, like, how can we withstand that? I agree with Alicia that she's going to have to answer questions. But I thought it was a little interesting to see that she was, that she kind of trying to hold her own, right? In some ways, she can't lose sight of the reason why she has surged, right? Which is that people think that she's a fighter. People know that she knows the issues front end and back. And to kind of try to pivot away from that, just wouldn't be her, right? And at the end of the day, I think most elected officials, especially successful ones at a high level, they don't run away from their bread and butter, right? They know this is what they got there. And so I think sometimes, she wouldn't necessarily be the first elected official to be put in a position where her strengths can also be turned against her in terms of her weaknesses. But I think, I think, to me was more glaring, aside from the, from this kind of piling up on her, was the way in which they put all the older candidates together. I thought that was a visual, like a really stunning visual kind of thing. And so I'm curious, Alicia, in terms of what you thought about, like, at least in some ways, how the visualness of not just her, but all like the other different candidates,
Well,
how
the
did that go
framing,
about?
the framing, because
Right,
they're not only the
visual
head,
framing.
the leaders in terms of polling. So on some level, that's why they're in the middle, right? But also because they sort of framed it that way. And he asked, I think, Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman, a direct question, like, and she referred to them as those three, which is interesting in itself. But Alicia, to that point, how did you think that sort of us versus these the old heads that may not be able to last the test of time? How do you think that played out in the spectacle?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's, we have such an age gap with there, and there were just so many damn candidates up there that how else are we supposed to really, lay them all out and have it to be where they're going to be engaging with each other? Now, of course, the issue of putting like Pete right next to Warren, and that, kind of promotes the exchange. I feel like Senator Harris should have been, a little bit closer to add to it. She is a sitting senator, sits on very important committees, to be able to add in some of her background influence. I think would have helped fuel the conversation as well. But it almost felt like they're like, okay, we're gonna put the kids at this table over here, kind of not my jam necessarily to see that. But I mean, am I also recognizing
the favorite son is they're trying to
they're edging it, and I get it.
He does definitely an agenda to try to
and
push
then you still and I mean, I'm still having the reactions sometimes where I'm like, wait, 12 of you? Wait, how many are still up here? I mean, seeing Steyer up there was just awkward. And so I think we still have a long
choice
way.
Of tie, by the way, for Tom Steyer.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest, or Yang still not wearing a tie. It's just the whole dynamic is just awkward.
Alicia, do you think I find it from a strategic perspective, so, at some level it does make sense to sort of start trying to bang on Warren and knock down her positives, right? Because she's got a strong brand at this point, regardless if she wins or loses, right? And has stayed pretty politically clean over the years. But I found it interesting how at worst Biden's still basically tied as the front runner with her, and the fact that the person that's been attacked sort of in the larger politics has been Biden recently because of the Hunter Biden situation. And and regardless of, even though that's a flimsy attack, it's still been an attack. And Biden, in typical Biden style, has taken a little while. I think he's responded stronger in the last couple of days, but again, took him a while to sort of respond to that. And so why do you think, I guess my question is, if strategically, if Mayor Pete and even Senator Harris and the rest of the boy band members, I call them, are trying to create carve out a space somewhere between the progressive wing and Biden, probably closer to Biden, maybe debatable,
try to get the Pete, right? I mean, you kind of get Pete where he's like the in between, where, and I think just leveraging him to that position was giving him the ability to. I mean, I think it was like Pete 2.0 that we saw here. It was a little bit more.
But Alicia, my question to that though is, if Biden is kind of the weaker one, why wouldn't you pick on him to try to knock him down a peg instead of the progressive one, which is not really your ideological competitor in that sense?
You're getting airtime. I mean, if you're going to get the whole thing is to get yourself more time on the screen. I mean, she was the one to do it because you have such contrast, and there's just a different level of dialogue that goes through. I mean, with Biden, you really risk, you poke at him, you may not be able to get your point across because he might be going off on some tangent with God knows what leaves his mouth. And so, I mean, if you're trying to not only attack somebody, but then also get your point across, she seems like the better person to do, because you'll have an exchange of ideas more so than Biden, where it's his, I don't know how to put it. I mean, he goes so far left with like his randomness of what he says on his radios and whatnot that he was going on before. But
and then the other thing,
how do you debate with that?
No, and then the other thing is that, and Julian Castro, Secretary Castro, learned this the hard way at the last debate, is that if you push on him aggressively, you get smacked down by the mainstream media because there's this double standard. And I do want to ask you later, Alicia, sort of some of the gender politics, particularly some of those spicier interactions toward the end of the debate where people started finger pointing and got a little more aggressive. And you're watching and listening to the Found in Translation post Democratic presidential primary debate edition on all our various video and audio platforms. Again, you're also listening to this, including as a radio program, Alicia, on WPPM Radio 106.5 FM, hashtag People Powered Media. I'm here with political strategist from coast to coast, Alicia Lewis from California, Elbert Garcia, Miami, and I'm here in the frigid Northeast, trying to break down for y'all the some of the big picture items and some of these other details that got skipped, like immigration. Who would think? Why would that be something we would want to talk about in 3 hours?
Heard it's a thing.
Oh, something like that. Alicia,
in Ohio, I guess, folks in Ohio, they didn't think that
by the way, the reason we're losing Ohio is we don't address those issues. And by the way, the reason Ohio's dipping as an economy is they don't embrace immigrants. But that's another story for another time. Alicia, any other sort of big picture items, your takeaways from this debate tonight?
I think it was the first time that I think we got to really, get a little bit deeper in the weeds on pushing some of the candidates, really, more of the exchange. Before it had been somebody makes a statement, you get a quick response, they kind of move on. This, they let each other go at it a little bit more. And I think that allows us to see some of those like underpinning feelings that they're having up there. And those tensions start, peeling back. By the time we got to that third hour, although everyone was tired, you started seeing a little bit more of the clapbacks, a little bit more snappiness with each other on the topics. And I think that was actually a really telling sign for voters. So then you can start realizing, like, what is my candidate really about? And if it means that you're turning to bring up the gender politics, means that if your go-to is to, turn aggressively, snap and point your finger and co-opt people's work as a means of getting your message across, God help you with female voters.
Hello.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that, I think that when you saw the different energy level of the candidates, I agree with Alicia. I think by the end, we really got to kind of crystallize as to who was really kind of like, they kind of crystallized their message. I thought at some point it was interesting because every time Booker spoke, especially in the middle, I thought that he was almost kind of running the script, but like, he just wasn't feeling the energy, wasn't feeling in terms of the time there. And I thought, people were especially in the middle, people were kind of running through the motions. It's 3 hours. like, how do you sustain any amount of attention, to a multitude of different issues and ideas there? But I thought that I agree. I felt that last, you could have easily have just tuned into the last hour. And I think at least gotten a sense of what folks were feeling at the time.
And I think there's something to be said too about Booker. I feel like at times he's a candidate from a different time when he's up there compared to the other ones. What he says is not wrong. And I think it strikes at a moral chord that a lot of us have deep down in our values with our humanity and what it means to care for your community. And unfortunately, because of where the dialogue has become so divisive, and not even just on political spectrum, but just as person to person in our communities, it seems so out of place with everything else on how the rhetoric goes on the debate stage. And so I know that his theories of like the way in which we'll have like this common good that's going to, rise above all of this mess. I have a hard time buying in that that's going to be a doable factor when we have such institutionalized problems that are happening.
It's so difficult.
Yeah, no, go right ahead. No,
I was gonna say it's also so difficult too because of the media landscape that we're in, right? Like I think if you have individual conversations with folks of another era, right, or a generation, they want to hear those platitudes, right? They something strikes to them. It almost makes them feel safe as people are talking about all this partisanship, right? But if you look at social media, if you look at like the way the media is being driven, like that's not what drives people's enthusiasm, right? People want to hear, hardcore ideas, even if they're able to negotiate those ideas. And when it comes to public policy, they still want people to kind of move from a position of any position, really, right? Like some sort of defined position there. And Corey, I think you're absolutely right. Corey a lot of times sounds like, again, he sounds like a senator, right? Like your classic, statesman senator who can kind of gather and push this through. But that's not the type of president that people are looking for, right? That's not the type of leadership, especially in these urgent times that people seem to be looking for.
And that's the kind of leaders, and that's the kind of people they were trying to replicate. Some of them were trying to replicate that style in 2016 on the Republican side, and it just didn't click with that electorate. And I feel on some level, the Democratic electorate is torn because we don't want to feed into this guy, Trump, but at the same time, I think in the back of our minds, we're looking for someone that we feel like on some, I heard some pundits talking about this, that the voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, they probably would prefer a Warren or a Sanders generally, or someone new or fresh, but they're just so paranoid that we're going to need someone like Uncle Joe that can, kind of be a regular guy and kind of get, kind of have a certain rapport and certain kind of approach with Trump, that we're tying ourselves in these mental knots about what do we want, what do we think will win. This guy doesn't debate particularly well. He is kind of old. There are some of the things we weren't so happy about Obama that he reminds us of. God, he's old school. A lot of voters, particularly in our community, could be a great grandkids. And so he just, so those are the things that are all sort of on our mind. Again, you're watching here the Found Translation talk show and listening to it. Really appreciate you listening to our analysis. El Garcia, Alicia Lewis, and of course your host, Ray Collazo. Alicia, what do you think? I'm struggling with, I have some thoughts about it, but I guess I have two questions for you. Do you think anything fundamentally changed today? I guess that's my first question. Let's ask that question. Any fundamental dynamics in the race may have changed in your mind after today?
I mean, I think it's still going to be, you're going to have, the Warren diehards are obviously still going to be there. I think they were just further fueled. I think maybe more women are probably going to be even more upset if they weren't already leaning in her camp. I think that's definitely, seeing the exchange between her and Biden is going to maybe light a little bit more on that. But in terms of getting to hear from some of the other candidates, I mean, Julian Castro finally bringing up police violence and looping that into talking about gun violence just felt so real and so relevant, and recognizing the, while everyone's bickering about gun buybacks or this, or how are we going to do, confiscation, whatever that is. And he's like, let's take another step back and let's talk about, institutionalize like some sanctioned killings of people that are unarmed on our streets, and bring up police violence as being gun violence as well. And I think that generation wise, that really resonated. Obviously, cuts across culture barriers as well. And it was like, oh, there is another topic we need to be talking about that nobody here is addressing. And I don't know. I think that for those guys, it really highlighted the importance of having younger, diverse voices in the room. But I don't know that it changes like the scorecard on who's leading.
Yeah, I agree with that. And talk to me, Alicia, about the gender dynamics. So you just alluded to one of the most interesting exchanges at night, which happened right before we basically started getting on the show here, which was essentially Biden making the argument of the case. Well, I'm the only one that's actually done things here. I've passed legislation. I've been in Washington a long time, and a lot of things have happened while I was there. And then Warren's response, which I literally wrote down, like she's going to jump on him about the CFPB. And then when she brought up, well, I sort of created this major agency that helps working people from scratch. And he basically sort of, talk to us about the body language, and his response was very aggressive.
It was just absolutely offensive. I mean, for him to, one, take credit for the work that, countless people contributed to get it across the finish line, but that was her brainchild. I mean, there's no taking that away from her on what she accomplished for consumer protections across this country when nobody else was ever elevating it. And we still lag behind it at the state level, even blue states like California, what we do for consumers. And so to even hint that he, did more than her on that is awful. But then, I mean, just broadly over the other people on that stage, on what they've contributed to, the work that they've done. I mean, Kamala was here in California, working in what is the strongest state economy in the country, and helping put protections in place and doing stuff as an AG that other folks weren't taking on. And I think that, erasure by him is just a really telling sign over just his demeanor about how he leads. It's just, I did everything. It's like he wants to claim the work from Obama, but then not unless it's unsightly, right? It's constantly, now he has ownership of everybody on the stage. But the way he went about it, to turn to be as vocal and loud as he was at her, and just that body language aggression, everything elevated. It was clear that he was angry at her, and it wasn't about the point. He was really putting it on her, like, I did this for you.
Yeah, and I'm going to be interested to see how women voters respond to the microaggression in that exchange, which I took note of. Particularly was when she was talking about the work she did with the CFPB, and then he said, "You did your job," or "You did a really good job." Like, you did the job you were supposed to, or something like that. It's almost like, you were one of the workers. We were the leaders. We were the bosses. So LB, the other part that Elbert is,
I think he came across as that classic, like, man trying to take over, or trying to take, attribution for, the work that a woman did, right? Like, I mean, we see this class, and whether or not his campaign realizes it or not, I mean, it really kind of, he kind of fit into that stereotype, right? And what I thought was kind of classic, right, was she, where Warren kind of responds by saying, like, there's a lot of people who helped out, President Obama and all these other people, and specifically not naming him, right? Like, I mean, this was like her dig at, like,
wow.
this is not the first time.
You know what I mean? That was a response to, that was a tit for tat situation.
No. And rightly so, but it was almost like it's not the first time that she's been in a room where a man has been trying to take credit for something that she's done. Right?
No, and so I thought
that was that. And
the thing was, he should have said is, well, if you were all so powerful, how come you didn't get me the votes to be the Treasury Secretary, where I really could have done some damage? He didn't exactly go all off for her when that was really the job she was being set up to do.
No, but I
to run the CFPB as well. Like, that didn't happen. That was supposed to happen.
And I think it's a classic, look, I think, look, Joe is increasingly, in my mind, at least especially in a particular demographic, is, he's sinking a bit, right? He's losing water, right? Because I think with every reaction, he kind of, like, strengthens people's perception of who people probably think who he really is anyway, right? And the only thing that Joe has going for him is that there is this, I don't want to even say moderate middle, right? There's this core group that is in the middle of, and who is afraid of the change that is coming potentially, right? And I think in the party, there's these group of, and I hear it all the time among a bunch of different folks who are saying, well, all I want to win, but at what cost do I win, right? And I think it's folks who are kind of, and I think Warren talks a little bit about that. Like, it's like there are a bunch of folks who are like, well, she really kind of had this really eloquent way of saying, like, everyone's fighting in America, right? Like, everyone at the end, she's like, like, folks are fighting for their healthcare, people are fighting for their housing, and if you're not seeing that, you're kind of, you're not kind of trying to see it. And I think there's increasingly, those Biden voters are going to be increasingly challenged because this guy is not bringing it in. I mean, like, he's riding the coattails, not just of the Obama presidency, but also the coattails of all his years in office. And I think, like Alicia said, I mean, it's great and done, but it's another guy from another era, right? And that's not the era we need.
LB, let me go ahead, Alicia. No, go ahead.
I was say about, with Biden, like, unless he's going to address his clear hostility that he has towards women, it's going to continue to be a problem. I mean, when we go into the general, who does he think is going to phone bank or walk for him, or donate those, even if it's small dollars, to open up their wallets and do that for him? I mean, you're setting the tone now over what you think over half the electorate. And if that means that you're hostile to women, you're taking credit for their work, you're not the first time being aggressive and pointing at them when they push back on you, because we know he's done that to advocates who question him about the Hyde Amendment.
And he's never done that to Bernie. He hugs Bernie. Albert, I saw it's a palsy thing with Bernie. Yeah, Bernie's just as big a threat to him.
And when women have called him out about his past before on advocates calling him out, whether it's about how he engages with women, and that women even talking about that you make me uncomfortable in these ways, your behavior, it's always dismissive. And I think that level of just selective hearing on the issue, I don't know if it's just proactively wanting to be ignorant about what it is to engage with women in any space. But that's just not going to fly when we get to the general. I mean, he can tout himself as VP all he wants, but he always had President Obama in his demeanor leading that conversation consistently. So I have a real hard time. I mean, if it was just him up there before, I as a true blue, I would have problems being enthusiastic about walking for him.
Yeah, I mean, he faces a potential. He faces a potential kind of Clinton-esque problem again, right? Where like there's not only the enthusiasm gap.
Hillary Clinton
allows people, right? Hillary Clinton, right? The enthusiasm gap allows people to sit out the election, right? Now, people will be like, "Well, you're just talking crazy. How can anyone sit out the election in terms of Trump?" But the truth of the matter is that, I mean, Joe's walking a fine line here.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
It's not just it's the walking. But I mean, it's also not just sitting out, but it's also you need people to be a little bit enthusiastic to want to set up a phone bank, to do a local community gathering.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can be like, you know what, I'll show up and I'll vote for you, but I'm not going to organize for you. And that gap is me harmful.
Yeah. Alicia, I remember calling my compadre here and producer Elbert Garcia in 2007. And I was moving around and going to conferences, and I was interacting with, in this case, Latinos that were working for the Clinton campaign and the Obama and also the other Edwards. And there was actually, Biden's campaign manager that cycle was Latino, by the way. And I remember the Clinton Latino folks were like the kids of Latinos in the Beltway, Congress people's kids, like, political professionals. And they would sit around talking about, they were like, "Oh, so what are you doing this cycle?" "I'm doing Hillary." In that, like, that's my job. Like, that's who I'm supporting because that's the ticket. That's the one that's paying the best and, and is the closest commute to my house. You know what I mean? Like, it's a job. The Obama people, a lot of them didn't have the same experience and cachet. And keep it real, Obama's Latino operation wasn't much until the general. So,
right.
But the people in general, and the few Latinos that were there, but the people in general, they were ride or dies. And I go back to, when I see in social media, shout out to the political director for the Bernie Sanders campaign, a great friend to the show, Alicia Mejia. You need to have her on Que Lo Que, Elbert, Dominican Colombian woman from New Jersey, fantastic leader. And she does a whole Twitter thing this weekend about opening up the East LA office for Bernie Sanders.
Can we talk about Bernie while we're here?
We're going to talk about him for sure. But my point is that the passion that came out of that social media content that I observed with Ann Lily and her amigas and her young Latina leaders this weekend, that's the question I've always asked. Is that passion going to be there for people that are knocking on doors in the farmlands in Iowa? And to your point, if he gets to the general election, you want to talk about Bernie Sanders. Bernie was wide awake today. He looked virile today.
Yeah.
What did they do at the hospital? I am thinking they got that blood flow and oxygen.
Bernie looked great. Damn. Beyond anything, he looked great.
He looked seriously, it was it's completely different. And also because everybody was so busy attacking Warren, he was just clicking through his points and he made them. And I had asked about Bernie, about talking about him because you're talking about enthusiasm on campaigns, and I think no matter where people feel about their candidates, I think there's no denying that enthusiasm and that fire in the belly to do the work and organize does exist on their campaign. And I think that's a really big fear of, if we choose one of these other more moderate candidates, what's going to happen to that? And is there a way to, let's say Warren gets it, will that carry over? What will that enthusiasm mean in terms of core community outreach and willingness to do it from, regular people who've been volunteering and giving their time, and students? And so, I think as Dems, we sometimes think too much about all these things, and we worry so much because we recognize there's so much on the line for people we do care about. Yeah.
I go back to, Elbert, the common thinking among the political class is that, even if you assume a close or very muddled top tier after Iowa and New Hampshire, between the top three that we currently have, what changes the dynamic about South Carolina for Joe. And that's kind of the common thing. Like, as long as he can stay close, then black people will pull him over because there's nothing happening at the top that's going to change their the potential black vote in South Carolina. But I think about enthusiasm. I think about these different dynamics. I think about the fact that Warren and Sanders and others still have a few months to gain traction. Again, we go back to this enthusiasm gap. What's there for diverse voters as we think about the Nevada caucuses and California, which is going to have a very big influence in this race nobody's talking about, in Texas and some of the other states where Latinos will have more of a say. I go back, LB, like, what could change the dynamics and put Biden's in jeopardy? Because the reality is, until we have elections, him and Warren and Bernie as sort of a close third are still the top tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to figure out. I think there's still an undetermined issue out there that the candidates will have to take a stand on that will make it clear as to, their leadership potential for the party, right? Like there's a kind of a mini crisis, I think, that we've yet to kind of see. I mean, I think Joe's in there because at the end of the day, no one else, people look at Joe and I think people say the person who is in middle America, perhaps, the classic kind of, white working class, voter there that we lost in 2016, Joe can get that back for us. Yeah. Right. And I think, and what it points to is a lack of faith that the party has that it can actually mobilize other folks, right? That it can actually reassemble this Obama coalition.
I was going to say, just because you can argue if we just get black turnout and even Latino turnout, because it's a small part of the electorate, but it's a swing vote in those states. If you just got minority turnout back to parity for the Obama years, we're not having this conversation. Yeah. So the question is, who is the person that can get us over the top in those states, even in the states that are perceived as the bastions of white America that we're so scared to not insult them, and you can't say anything about a white guy like Kavanaugh. We're so paranoid about these people, and we have to challenge those paradigms. And by the way, allow those people are women that we need to get back into the fold, or at least, sort of engage, right? So the stereotype that it's this man that has a hard hat and is a retired auto worker that's bitter and watches too much Fox News. Look quickly, Elbert, give me give me a couple winners for tonight. Give me a couple winners.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, I think that the folks who had some really good lines, right? Like I'm gonna shout out your guy, your guy Yang over here, because I thought he brought up a really interesting point about data and property rights, right? And I thought that he kind of, and again, I mean, a lot of things that Yang says make sense, but people wonder, is it going to, get traction? Can it really kind of get people? But this idea about data and property, like, I mean, if I'm in his campaign, folks, if I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about like wealth, if I'm thinking about people like figuring out that stuff, I thought to myself, well, damn, that's true. Right. Like I never kind of thought about it and put it that way. And I think that's a, again, that's a much more wonky policy point, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to figure out, especially in terms of growth. So I like that part of it. I think Julian Castro, I think Daniel 777, one of our folks who are watching us, he had a question about ¿Y qué pasó con Julio Castro? I think Julian had some really nice bites. I mean, I think the fact that when he talked about police violence, is also, that police violence is also, young gun violence. And it's specifically, talking about the different, I mean, he does this constantly, right? He does this constantly and consistently, right? About, like Alicia said, I mean, really bringing in, the thoughts of, a certain portion of folks of color. And we feel like, there's a voice there. And so I think he continued to do that. So I think he's definitely, I mean, winner, maybe I don't know about winner per se, but certainly I think, certainly he brought up. But look, I have to say, I think Warren did an excellent job. I think she took the punches. I think she stands, sometimes if you're still standing, you're a winner there, right? And I think that she came across as being able to handle a debate. I mean, I've always thought so, but increasingly handle a debate, not just with Trump, but with Trump voters. Right? Like I can see her not being afraid to walk on Fox News and say, I'm going to tell it to Fox. I'm going to tell it to CNN. I'm going to tell it to anybody who can listen. Right. So I think honestly, for me, they're more, I think more people walked away as losers than winners here. But I definitely think that she had something good on her.
Alicia, who's your? Give me two winners. One from the top tier, and one do you think that maybe kept themselves above water here? Because I agree with you, Albie. I think for the most part, a lot of the lower tier candidates are sliding away.
Yeah, I think obviously Julian, managed to bring up, the points that we needed to hear. We needed to have those things, a reminder done while we're, present. And I mean, we obviously had the gun debate, go through between Pete and Beto as well, but nothing I think just helped. We all get those more, how we want to go about the legislation, and we hear about those constantly, but we never get those other reminders. And so have Castro come back in and say, hey guys, don't forget. And I think it reminds us that we have a talented bench coming through. And I think he's long term. I'm so glad he's young, because it means we have him for a long time and figure out what that place will be even after this cycle. You can definitely see that he can be a leader for the Dem Party and help us heal and get to a place where we have some functioning, democracy again. But I mean, Warren, she took the punches. I agree. She dealt with it. And I think it was kind of, not, I would say, practically inspiring at first. I mean, she dealt with it. She got the hits. I mean, Klobuchar really went at her as well. But to be able to, at the very end, the way that she had the exchange with Biden was a nice way for her to step out in a powerful, dynamic where she just wasn't there for his, nonsense. She kind of just brushed that aside, said her piece, thanked Obama, and moved on. And I think that slight power move was done nicely. It was done in her style. She's not going to have a presence on the stage like anyone else. She's going to be her own person. Harris, I proud to have her as my senator. I think that she, managed to get some of her points out there as well. But, I didn't get to see her, I think, be as shine as well in a debate as I know that she can do. Because there's 12 people and it's drowning it out. So I would like to just see like 4 of them and really, really have that discussion. But Warren and Castro, if we're going to go for those that are, polling lower.
I hear you. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this. I think, first of all, just the fact that Sanders showed so much, I don't think it's going to move him up in the polls. But Sanders, if he had looked ill, it could have been all over today. Yeah. And the fact that he looks so physically strong, I think keeps him relevant in the race. So I think he's a winner just on that alone. I think, look, I'm not saying, I think his performance was generally strong, even though it's, it's not as substantive as I think the media portrays. But I think it's clear to me that the media sees Mayor Pete as the dark horse that could fill the Biden space if he were to slip. And so, again, I'm not saying this from a performance evaluation perspective. I'm saying this from the perspective of if I'm Mayor Pete's campaign, I'm feeling pretty good because I'm seen as in the final 4.
They want him.
But I mean, that's part of this game, right? So I'm looking at it from that perspective. And I think for the lower tier, look, and I've been very critical of her because I think she's someone that is a strong senator and a potential VP sort of level candidate. I think this is the first time Senator Klobuchar showed a pulse. I'm not saying she knocked Warren out or damaged her, but she got her hands on her a couple times. And I think she showed she took a step forward in trying to draw a contrast of, well, if you don't like Biden, but you need an alternative that's a little safer, and I'm competent and I'm here. Give me a loser, Alicia. Give me a loser here. Who's the biggest loser for tonight?
I am over Tulsi. So done. Not here for it.
Was Tulsi, was she there as a candidate or a CNN contributor?
What was happening? Why was she starting to ask questions? I was not in the mood at all. I'm not a fan of Yang, but that's because, I'm just not there on the policies issues, but gets them across. So he was like teetering there, but no, by far I was not there for Tulsi's anything. And Tom Steyer wasn't even, I can't. They turned the camera to him a couple of times. I'm like, oh, you're still here.
Yes, Tom Steyer was in out. I didn't want to list him as a winner, but I thought when he spoke, I thought he was fine.
He's a nice guy, but
yeah. And I'm not just saying that because he's funded many of my projects.
No, he is.
Full disclosure, since we all got to disclose, I work for NBC Universal, who owns this, who owns that, that buys me. It's not that. So,
they're good people, but no, and I think his heart's the right place. And I think the fact I loved the clip that when they really got to like I think it was Klobuchar who said like even the billionaires not supporting the billionaires, and I mean his policy's in the right place, but I'm just every time I was like, oh right, that's right, you're here. I forgot.
Elby, give me a loser, brother.
Well, I think it's clear that I think that Biden was a big loser. That's my personal feeling. I think he just, but I just think he's on a losing streak, right? Like, I just think, I mean, I'm going to put it in a sports game. He's like shooting 3 for 25. Like, maybe he'll shoot a 3-pointer here and there, but he's not doing well.
Russell
right?
Westbrook.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and he's in the game because he's got the big contract, but that's really why, right? That's the only reason why. Right. And so I think
played on big market teams. Yeah.
So I think that's it for me in terms of big loser. I think the other person who and I think the thing with Tom Steyer is that like you kind of wonder what's his role, right? Because I do think like when he spoke, he sounded like, but again, I think I go back to Alicia's point, which I think is really great, which is that like sometimes sometimes you have people who seem like they're just not fit for the race that is currently being run, right? And to put it in more
tonight to me,
and again, but I thought Beto was I don't think he lost anything more than he hasn't. Like he's operating under a Kelvin level anyway. Like he's not really being that relevant.
He had built a little momentum, at least in perception, but he just wasn't.
Just let him MC the debates. Like, let's just let him roll with it and not run a candidacy, but like be the MC, chime in, get people riled up. He's a good like hype person for the issue because I'm here for his, I'm here for your point. I'm not mad at your point, but I don't also want you to be president. But it's okay.
You know what's messed up with Beto? And for full disclosure, again, me and Elbert went to college with Beto, but you know what's messed up with Beto? So in Alicia, let me ask you this question, Alicia. In an Alicia Lewis administration, let's make it President Lewis. Incredible miracle comeback. She throws her hat in the ring because she doesn't see anything going on. I don't even know if Alicia Lewis puts Beto in her cabinet. Like, I can't even think of like an obvious role for him in your cabinet, Alicia.
First off, I would have like a straight dictatorship because nice. I recognize myself. And so, I mean, just full militant all the way.
Progressive Trump.
Do a coup to get me out.
Well, it's always Latin America here, I guess. I
tell you revolution in, revolution out. It's the only way.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the loser piece, I think in general, not to say that I think they had a strong, even though there were moments, particularly with Julian, I agree that, I mean, Atiana, our sister in Fort Worth that we lost tragically this week. And you always, what's ironic about this whole thing, and I got to give Julian credit, I think it's no small coincidence that I think he's the only one of all these people that has an African-American woman as his campaign manager, of all of them, I believe. But I could be wrong on that. But my point is that he always seems a step ahead of everyone, including the black candidates on the civil rights stuff during these debates, and bringing up policing and bringing up women's rights issues. And I want to talk to you about that, Alicia, because that was a big part of our discussion during the debates. But I think in general, the BC folks are just sort of fading away. I think the media, and I think the reality is people see this as a 4-person field. And I think Mayor Pete has gotten the golden ticket to squeeze into the Final Four from a media perception. He's certainly going to have the money to be there. But I do want to talk about Senator Harris for a minute, because to me, she's the one that, pardon the hip hop reference, but it's sort of fallen off from in every way in terms of her engagement in these debates, which seems uneven at times and almost casual relatively to how she started 6 months ago in these debates, to the media perception, the time she's not. I mean, other people sort of find ways that aren't real rude to like get in the conversation. She doesn't seem that like aggressive. And I'm just wondering, I want to get your thoughts first. I'll be real quick. Then Alicia's like, I mean, is it over? I mean, I'm not trying to be, look, I mean, much love to her. I mean, some of the people on her staff are great to us, and we're very excited about her candidacy, but I just don't see it. I just don't see it at this point. I don't see a strong argument. And the code switching, it's like she's trying out like comedic material at the wrong time. The brand is all over the place. Elby, I mean, is she going anywhere? Because she should have been one of the top. Yeah. I mean, she was a top tier candidate here till, I don't know, 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mean, I think people underestimate how much of a marathon running, not just for office, but running for the presidency is, right?
Okay.
And I think
give me a second on that. Okay. Now, polling, he's not really doing that well. But if I told you 6 months ago that Julian Castro and Andrew Yang would, to your point, would seem to have more energía and ánimo at this point than Kamala Harris, the way she started in Oaktown, and I know, Alicia, you know about that. So that's what I'm saying is that.
Yeah, but I think, but this is the thing.
Apples to apples.
But no, but this is the thing. There's a different campaign. I mean, if you're talking about like politics, operations, and things like that, the thing is that like when you are
who showed you more gusto tonight, Julian Castro or Kamala Harris?
No, there's no doubt. No. Okay. I think I think
Julian's not up there like that for her.
No, but I think we have to walk a different line because we're talking about a woman of color, and not just woman of color, but a Black woman. And so when we talk about the pressure, the dynamics, the bias that you enter every space into, and recognizing that we have, like, truly not just racist attitudes, we have anti-Black attitudes when you come into every level of engagement. That she doesn't have the room to be able to, do the call outs in the same way or to come at it because of unfortunate, tropes that we put on women particularly. And then of course, women of color, and then, the layering of Black women as well, that room for your space to be able to, I think, stretch your legs as a candidate is just so different.
So at least to that, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. No. Men do too much. They cut off the women. I'm sorry. But to your point then, we're all good. But to your point, Alicia, okay. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you just said. That being said, then what would your advice be to her? Because I hear what you're saying. I'm not saying that because I have a bias against her. No. And I'm not saying in the polling, and obviously race is a part of that. But we have seen a pattern here that not only with the debates, the last couple, but with her campaign in general, things are not moving forward. So is it? So what did you see tonight where she could have? Am I wrong? That I think to be an unevenness in terms of her approach.
Well, and I think that's where that unevenness. I think that's where that unevenness comes from too, is because we have. Look at the pathway, like what Pete has been given. In terms by the media, right? There's a lot of paths there. We have not the money, right? But we've not nitpicked at his race record in the same way that we've done to her on criminal justice as well. It's not that same weight hasn't been there. And, however we feel about the candidates, they just get a different path. And with that path means your momentum has to. So how are you supposed to set your brand, set your, strategy if you're constantly having to dodge these barriers that are being put out there and the way in which you're dealing with them? You're like, okay, wait, this isn't getting through. Do I change it up here? And those pivot points, I think also, layered into those biases makes it tough. Having worked with her on, her teams through, capital work and seeing the policies they put into California, I know she runs an effective team. And that she's personally just a fantastic person as well, with this great personality, and how this doesn't resonate through. That's why I think it's these bizarre the marathon burial, you just brought up about what that does to even an outstanding person in the long run, and then what the media does to it, and then how we frame it and layer all those complexities on. You can really kind of dim out even someone who should have been shining this whole time. And if I were on the campaign, I'd be looking like, let's get back to the core of what you've done. Yeah. When you've seen her debate in the past and there's not as many people on stage and she goes after her opponent, she is just ruthless. She is so good. And that Kamala, we've not been able to really see at all, I think, in any of these debates in the way that she's at. If you look back at her old campaign debate videos, when she ran for Senate, when she was running at the local level, those were, God help whoever was across from her.
I remember those debates, Alicia, when she was running for Senate against Loretta Sanchez. And, Loretta's our, that's fam too, but she's the cooker in them debates. But that's another story. But to your point, Alicia.
I was Team Harris. So,
no. And let me tell you, and we don't have time to get into it now, but you just brought up a really good point. And again, I'm saying this out of wanting this woman to shine. Regardless if she wins or loses, I want her to shine and everyone get to know who she is, because it's important for everyone to get to know these people, especially her. Is that, and I know, Alicia, you worked and our colleagues worked with her on beyond what she's known for, which is like, the criminal justice and prosecutor stuff. But, even as an attorney general, working on things like around predatory lending issues, housing reform issues, progressive in the way she, in her purview around these immigration issues. And you're
trafficking.
Right. The trafficking, that's the one I wanted to bring up. And that, that's not the Kamala we're getting to know. And that's what's frustrating, because I see someone like trying to throw, because she has so little time, she feels the pressure. She doesn't want to come off robotic. She wants to come off a little, and then she's throwing out these and I'm not saying she doesn't have good moments, because she does, but the quips and the jokes and it's, again, I just go to unevenness, and I just want to see all of her and not someone that's trying to fit in a difficult spot, albeit for sure.
And I want to, the point I want to bring up with the marathon is the point that it's not just her, but it's also her staff. Right. And I think that when you're operating that kind of a level, cross country, all these kind of different things, it's very easy to kind of like to play it safe, to get caught in playing it safe. Right. And I think, if I'm her campaign, I'm like, let's just take a day. Let's take a breather. It's hard to figure out, to find those times on the campaign to do it. But to get back to what Alicia said, is to like take a nap, take a nice long sleep, and get back to the core. Because sometimes what happens when
she has not been campaigning. I mean, in terms of her public schedule,
right?
Of the top tier people, she's been she's not. It's not part of this. Is not. Oh, I'm so exhausted because I'm campaigning.
No, and right.
Her schedule has not been amongst the top most out there people.
And I bring up the marathon not from an energy standpoint, but from a like, how do I lead in policy standpoint, right? Because it's not that she's tired, right? Like, I'm not saying like she's tired, but I think like mentally, I think it's almost like, how do you sustain that kind of energy? Look, Julian Castro is if there's a David and Goliath, he's like baby David, right? Like he's like there's nobody.
And he's barely qualifying for these debates. That being said, Kamala's got 5 times more support.
So he's playing with house money. He's playing with house money.
Right.
Kamala doesn't have to do that, right? And I think, the other thing is the difference between senators and I think and representatives.
And there's still a male-female dynamic there, regardless of him being a person of color. The other part of that is, I'm so glad y'all brought this up, because Mayor Pete on a lot of things gets passes, because he sounds a certain way. And I go back to this, and again, I'm not saying this because I don't like the guy. But the reality is, I was just, I know a lot of people supporting him. He's got some good Latinos on his campaign that we know, not senior level, but, good people, good young people get an opportunity. So, there's a learning, and the guy's very young. The reality is he's got a learning curve. He's got a lot to learn. But I'll tell you what, Elbert Garcia is in the military for 7 years. He's the mayor of a city that's 40% minorities. And you're in the military for 7 years. And I don't see any prominent Black or Latino surrogate that co-signs on him from his life. Yeah. That to me is telling. Because I know Elbert Garcia would have some people that would co-sign on him for him, So anyway, and Alicia Lewis certainly would have people that would co-sign him for your experience. And so that to me is telling. So he's got some work to do. Alicia, one of the things I wanted to touch base with you about, which I thought was a good thing, even though they had to shoehorn it in, is that a lot of the candidates, and to a degree the panel, the media, but on the CNN folks, but a lot of the panelists, and Julian and Kamala in particular, were the ones I recall bringing up the issues of women's reproductive rights and women's rights. Mm-hmm. So that was, to me, one of the positive developments of the night, that the candidates, most of which were people of color, made sure that was a big part of our conversation this evening.
Yeah, and finally, but really, when we talk about women's reproductive rights and access, they loop it into the healthcare conversation. And quite frankly, that's just not where the full battle is really being had anymore. When we're talking about places that don't even have clinics that people can go to, we have here in California, losing our, gynecologists and not having them available for women. So you can have all the insurance and healthcare you want, but where the hell are you going to go get your service from? And looking through some of the red states that are, putting legal implications into place if you even go access care. So it doesn't matter what your insurance card says if you have it, if you have nobody to go be able to render services, or you are at legal risk if you go render those services. So I don't know how you have the reproductive conversation in a robust way if you're isolating it just to healthcare, or you're just saying just Roe v. Like the Roe v. Wade, they really have to be a connected conversation, which is why I want somebody to ask that question and let folks talk about what's their game plan in its entirety on how you plan to protect and provide reproductive health access in this country broadly, and not piecemeal it into, well, you'll get insurance access. Well, okay, well, I don't have a clinic in my setting where I live. Where else am I going to go? Oh, it's being run by a hospital that doesn't provide these services, and my only way to obtain them is if I'm going to sue. That's just not a plan. And I think until we get the media and moderators to ask a very hard-hitting question over what is your plan to provide these and ensure people have access and are not legally punished for it, it's going to constantly just be like, little touch base on it. Yay, I'm supporting women. I'm doing this. It's like, well, no, I want to see a full rounded out plan on how you plan to revamp protections for women in this country.
Elbert, a half hour before we started taping, I texted Alicia Lewis and I said, Alicia, did I miss something? I know I did step away to put my kids to bed for a few minutes, but did we go 3 hours without an environmental segment, climate change segment, or an immigration segment? So just the fact that at 3 hours, CNN could not squeeze that in, I thought was, pretty exasperating, considering that if you think about the Democratic Party in Ohio, the Democratic piece in Ohio, a big selling point that Trump, that people bought in Ohio and in the upper Midwest, in the manufacturing North, was this argument that the Mexicans, whether they're in Latin America through the trade deals or crossing this border because of our, lax immigration system, are taking your jobs. And that's the problem. Not income inequality, not the lack of labor rights in this country. So the fact that in that setting, we didn't have the opportunity, the candidates were not given the opportunity and didn't have the courage, for the most part, let's keep it real,
right, to bring it up
the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I thought it was very telling.
Yeah, I mean, there is, if I'm, and look, you guys have probably spent more time in the Midwest than I have, but I think there's, just like we stereotype urban areas and stuff like that, there is certainly a certain stereotype about the Midwest and rural folks and that discussion out there. And I think the inability of the media and for these candidates to try to break through out of those stereotypes is really it's part of the reason why people dial out of this conversation, of this political conversation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people are not voting and people are not going out to vote because they don't see what the point is, because they don't see people talking about the stuff that really matters and really wants them to talk about, right? And so of all the people who should be figuring this out, it should be the damn Democratic Party, right? This isn't a general kind of thing. This is the Democratic Party, right? I could deal with one less discussion about Medicare for all and one more discussion about freaking education, or what are you gonna do, or those kind of things. I mean, it's un pleito. It's played out, yo. It's played out. Coño, deal with what people want, right? And the problem is that the party, and I'll go back and say it, the party does not have enough faith in bringing out the folks who normally sit out, because if those folks who normally sit out actually came out to vote, they would not only
Sanders as your president,
they would fundamentally change.
That's the answer. And AOC's
the entire thing. I mean, they would change the entire, this entire paradigm, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the core. They're still trying to figure out the white folks, and it's like, what? At the end of the day, you don't need that. You don't need that. What you need is to stand on policies that's going to help people, right? You have to let Black women lead. You've got to bring in all folks in that. You have to let folks who have the ideas actually lead. And it's really kind of a semi-hypocrisy that we're seeing, on the television stage, when you don't get the opportunity to talk about the issues that are going to bring those folks into the fold.
Alicia nodding her head. Alicia, I know you're feeling what my homie's talking about. Sister.
I am absolutely there. I mean, we can talk about healthcare in and out. People at the end of the day, we're going to talk about what's going to impact them. Beyond that, I mean, we know it polls well and they want to hear about healthcare, but that's not it. We're not a singular issue, family, setup. I want to know how my kids are going to access education, and not just free college. I want to know is there going to be language access for my neighborhood kids? Are they going to be safe in their schools? Are they going to have books? I mean, we have some states that are just dealing with such basic issues of resources.
Are the lights on in California, Alicia?
Are the lights
on? Is it casi como Santo Domingo in the Caribbean?
I'm just saying, I think DR may have had more hours of light this
California,
week, right?
What's our infrastructure plan? We have states that beyond just Flint, we have, hundreds of, communities out there that don't have access to clean water. And so if we're talking about core issues that impact people, can I drink the water that's coming out of my tap? Yes or no? What's your game plan to fix that? I mean, these are other issues that are worth, I think, engaging voters on and talking about it, and not assuming that we are just a 2-3 issue group, and really reach out to your community about what's going to make it better. And education, I think, is such a solid pathway into talking about it. Anybody who has kids gives a damn about what's happening in your schools.
No, and it's not about
the only one that talks about education at these things, by the way. And I got to give him that. He's not qualifying for these polls. He's not going anywhere. But I mean, the fact that especially as Latinos and people of color, we're demanding this conversation, and we're getting so little of it.
No, and the thing that I think also, and again, like, I don't think you should, you don't have to be a democratic socialist, right, to believe that money needs to be invested in people, right? And we have, like, people always say there's not enough money or this costs too much. And yet we've just witnessed one of the largest wealth redistribution efforts in the tax plan that happened like 2 years ago. And like just this week, the Treasury Department, announced that they would be borrowing like another outrageous amount of money to fund those damn things without a damn return. So all I'm saying is, like, even if you're the biggest capitalist in the world, none of these tax cuts are getting any return on your damn rate. Right? Like, it's not coming through. And so you don't have, like, and this is what pisses me off at midnight, right? Is that you have 3 hours of a discussion where you listen to this and you are not, from either of these candidates, are no more well educated as to how we're going to create a better world for our children. Right? And that's the biggest, that's the biggest loser after 3 hours here, right? Is that if you're people like us who actually watch 3 hours of this, I can't tell you where the hell do we go? Because although all these folks are really, really like intelligent, I want to know, to a certain degree, who's going to also not just be in the fight, but also be able to kind of also be able to see the fights that we're not talking about. And be able to like weave them together and to like
called leadership, isn't it, LB? It's incredible how that works. And that's something. Right. I want to thank our incredible panel, Elbert Garcia, my compadre, producer of these Democratic post of debate specials, and a great friend to the show, and a fantastic organizer and leader in her own right, Alicia Lewis. Alicia, we're going to give Alicia Lewis, our fearless Latina leader here, the final word. Alicia, anything else you wanted to share with our Founding Translation community about the debate? Anything else you're working on? Anything else on your mind as we wrap up this edition of the show?
No, just general rabble rousing. I encourage everyone to get on that, find a way to make good trouble in your community, and convince everybody, to go vote, because literally all of our lives depend on it. So we all are going to have to be out there organizing. So pick your candidate, get out there and work hard. And then for the general, whoever the hell it is, we're all in. Especially
in California, because I keep going back to it. You add up all the votes in Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and then California March 2nd, and people are going to be voting in California throughout that time period. Then March 2nd, California is going to give out 8 times more votes than all those states combined. So California is going to be a big part of this conversation, and it's very, very competitive out there. It's been interesting to see the dynamics. I've been thinking, Elbert, as we wrap up the show, that I was trying to think about a name or a concept that would connect Alicia Lewis to Elbert Garcia. And I'm thinking about the fact that Alicia Lewis and her family are some of America's great Sacramento Kings fans.
I got that.
And that you're in hours debuting what I predict is going to be considered the hottest new Latino-led podcast in the nation, Que Lo Que, dedicated to the happenings and going-ons of our wonderful Dominican-American community. And the name that ties this together is our homie from the Bronx, Louisville Cardinal, and former Sacramento King great Francisco Garcia.
Francisco Garcia.
Y'all like that name. There's a little connection there.
I'm just saying, 6 Degrees of Dominican should replace, should replace Kevin Bacon.
One of the few Latino kings, and someone that is a future guest of Que Lo Que. LB, let people know about Que Lo Que podcast is going to be popping in hours from now.
Hours from now, we're going to be dropping a couple of episodes. The Que Lo Que podcast really is just an opportunity to just, focus on the Dominicans, young and old, who are impacting our community today here in the United States and even across the world, right? I think not enough. I think there's a renaissance going on, I think, in literature. It's been there in sports, it's been there in other areas. And I think Dominicans are really kind of trying to take their place at the table. We're a multiracial community. We're a Caribbean community. There's a lot to us that people don't know. And so I think, a couple of us got tired of sitting on the sidelines and figured, hey, if there's a podcast for anything, then why isn't there a podcast specifically about Dominicans and Dominican leaders? And so, we're launching this out and, we're building on every single effort and every single platform. You could find us at queloquepodcast.com. That's queloquepodcast.com. And like I said, in a couple of hours, we'll be dropping it. By the time this airs, you'll be able to go. And I'm sure a couple of episodes. We'll have a couple of people and a couple of people you don't know, and that's what's really great about it. I think all these folks, I think, Ray, as you know, there's a lot of our folks out here, that are in the grind. They're doing some great work, and they need to be spotlighted on, and they need to be told, that we need to know who they are and what they're doing. So,
best of luck, brother. I'm so proud of you, and we're going to continue to support you. Even as the show wraps up, Alicia's identifying the haters. This is wonderful, Alicia. Thank you for your help. I want to thank everyone, particularly that's been watching on Facebook Live, and everyone's going to listen to the show. We had people, activists, people from the arts community from coast to coast. Even my spiritual advisor, Father Vincent Oram, is watching from his native Uganda. So we've got people literally all over the world checking us out. We don't play. So amen. Yo lo bendiga, Father Vincent, and our great friends Marcos Villar, labor leader Andy Perez, Juan Diego Ramirez from Hollywood was watching, Genaro in Phoenix. A lot of great leaders and friends. Thank you so much for joining the Found in Translation Talk Show post-debate edition. Continue the conversation on social media, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. And thank you so much for listening to the Found in Translation post-debate show. Peace.